All right, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for Starts with Home, GenNext Connect event with the Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa, and our guest speaker, Meg McCallum, who I'll introduce in a minute. If this is your first GenNext event, thank you so much for joining us. If you've attended one of our events in the past, great to have you back. My name is Cameron Ketchum. I'm a Director of Community Initiatives at United Way East Ontario, and I'll be your host today. I've been with United Way for about 8 years now, and in that time, I've had the great joy of working closely with key leaders in the housing and homelessness community in Ottawa, including the team at the Alliance to End Homelessness. I often think of homelessness as the most solvable of problems, and that's partly because of the brilliance and dedication of the people in this space, from agency leaders like Meg here today, to frontline workers and supporters, to donors and advocates like yourselves, and especially to the lived experience experts who are out front driving so much change on this issue. And that's why I'm so excited to be with you today and to contribute to this important and topical discussion. I do want to take a moment before we begin to note that United Way East Ontario and GenNext offices are situated on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory, and I think we do need to remember, as we engage in a conversation about homes, the colonial legacy of both removing homelands from the stewardship of Indigenous peoples and removing people themselves from their homes, especially youth. And keep this in mind as we move forward on our work always. Should you have questions as we go, please type them in the chat. As I said, we have moderators who are monitoring, and we'll collect them to ask at the end. But feel free to just submit questions at any time during the event. Just make sure you keep things respectful. And if you have any technical issues, just let us know. This event is hosted by GenNext East Ontario. And GenNext is a social impact movement for people who want to learn about the unique challenges facing our region and create meaningful local change. GenNext is all about bringing people together through philanthropy and fun. Our causes focus on mental health, youth homelessness, as we'll be touching on today or diving deep into today, equitable employment, and diversity and inclusion. Thanks to your engagement, vulnerable members of our communities are getting the support they need in the ways they need it. At GenNext East Ontario, we believe that everyone deserves to find a place to call home. No young person chooses to be homeless, but many factors drive youth to leave home, like health challenges, family rejection, violence, abuse. It's a complex issue, made much more challenging, of course, over the past few years as we continue to feel the ripple effects of the pandemic experience and by our current context. Challenges related to inflation in the economy, ongoing and evolving health challenges, and just the challenges of affordability in general. So it is incredibly complex, which is why I'm glad we're able to talk about it today, along with other unique challenges facing our region and what you can do to make a meaningful and lasting impact. So I'll get started by introducing Meg McCallum, who's the Executive Director of the Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa. Meg is a nonprofit leader in our community with decades of experience developing inclusive communities and focus on community mobilization, engagement, and advocacy. I don't think that come close to capturing the breadth of work you do, Meg, and the impact you've had, especially in this recent role. But tell us a bit more about yourself and your role with the Alliance.
Thanks, Cameron, and thanks everyone for being here and sharing your lunch hour with me today. It's really important work that we're doing together, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity. I think Cameron gave a really nice introduction about the Alliance and has shared a little bit about my work. I really wanted to start off with talking a little bit from a personal perspective, because I'm a little bit of an older person. So, you know, I've lived through some of the policy changes that have led us to where we are today. I wanted to start by saying that I grew up in Ottawa. in the East End in Gloucester. And my family, we had a single family home. And then when I was in grade 6, we sold that home and moved into a smaller townhouse unit. And I don't think I realized until I was an adult why that move took place. But it's because in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, the interest rates went through the roof and my parents could no longer afford that single family home and the interest rates and the mortgage that they had to carry on the property. So that was the first big impact of housing policy on my life. The second thing I want to point out is that I think I saw the first person I knew that was experiencing homelessness when I was 17 years old. And I want to kind of stress that up until the late 1980s, you did not see people experiencing homelessness on the streets. Homelessness was a temporary, situational, and that people were not on the street in the same way that we see them now. And I think it's important to recognize that just because something is the way it is today, doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. And then finally, just to note, just another little personal thing that as a young single parent with 2 kids, I needed to find an affordable place. I found a place in downtown Ottawa. It was the second and third story of a house, and it was $521 a month, heat, hydro, and parking included. That was so many years ago. My kids are 30 and 26, and I still remember getting the keys to that place. I actually told the landlord that I should probably pay more because my kids were going to use more hydro and water with baths. And she said, "Oh no, dear heart, I couldn't do that to you." So having that opportunity to have an affordable home it made all the difference for me and my family. And you know, it's that type of thing that makes it possible for people to go on to have you know, to achieve their potential and move forward with a positive future. And I just want to note that lovely affordable home that I had was bought by a developer and was tarted up and resold as a private family home for over $1 million a couple of years ago. So that's me and my history of housing policy. So I've worked in housing advocacy and engagement and government relations for over a decade. I think that housing policy and homelessness policy really matters because the changes that can happen at that level are the ones that are going to have the huge impacts on our cities, on our communities, and on our own lives and the lives of our friends and families. So that's where I'll leave it.
No, thanks for that, Meg. I think that's really helpful introduction and context to set for us. Because you know, when I say I think of homelessness as the most solvable of problems, it's because it's the product of choices. It's a product of policy choices and an environment that is manufactured in many ways. And I think you illustrated that really well in that the history of homelessness is actually not that long. These conversations that we've been so engrossed in are pretty new, and there's certainly solutions in place to address them. I wanted to introduce the Alliance and what the Alliance does. I have some notes here, but probably better to come from you. Do you want to capture for us who the Alliance is, their members, and what kind of work you do in the community, what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So we are a coalition of community organizations and people, and we work together to end homelessness through systems planning and coordination, public education and advocacy, and community-wide mobilization. And what that really means is that we're a very small staff team, and that staff team also now includes a team of people with lived experience of homelessness who guide and inform the work that we do, mostly again in the planning, policy, and governance areas. We work on public education, government education and orientation, and mobilization to help create that systems level change.
Perfect. No, thank you. And the members that make up the Alliance are on the front lines, you know, delivering services and working with people. But this role that the Alliance plays is so important in rolling up some of those experiences, the priorities, the needs that are being faced, and turning them into advocacy and policy proposals. And I think we'll learn more about what those look like now, because the rationale for this discussion was to really get into what the Starts with Home initiative and campaign is. The Alliance launched this in February, so it's pretty new and is designed very deliberately to platform three key messages around affordable housing: stopping the loss of affordable housing, creating more, and preserving the quality of affordable housing that exists. And there's sort of 6 key tactics that were built into that as well. But the timing was important because it was launched in the lead up to our municipal elections, which just wrapped up. And I think it was intentional in engaging candidates for council and for mayor, new and existing, and engaging them to take concrete action to solving the housing affordability crisis. And we'll let you take us through what that experience looked like and how successful it was. But it's important to note that, as it turns out, literally the day after our municipal elections, the province announced a new housing bill that has created some chaos in this sector. So I think the logic and the rationale around Starts with Home remains, and the tactics are just as important, things have pivoted a little bit in terms of figuring out what this new policy environment means for how we continue to advocate for some of these things. So we do want to unpack that today and get at the heart of it, especially understanding where folks who are listening in come in terms of being able to participate in this ongoing work. And so why don't I start with, well, we'll get into Starts with Home, but first maybe a bit more context around, this conversation is really about affordability and affordable housing, but there are layers to that even. Can you set us up for what do we mean when we talk about affordability and affordable housing, and who are we talking about in this conversation especially?
Sure. I guess the place to start for me is the concept of core housing need. So people are said to be in core housing need if they don't have housing that is affordable, which makes sense. It's not within their budget, that's not suitable or adequate. And so those two concepts get into things like, is it sized correctly? Is it in a good state of repair? And is it adequate to meet the needs that they have? That can include accessibility as well. And safety and other concepts. So when we're talking about the element of affordability, really, you have to look at what the costs are that people have to bear in their daily lives, and try to come up with a definition that means that people can afford to pay their rent and live the rest of their lives. So CMHC came up with a definition years ago that's been around for a long time, and it makes sense for a lot of people, and that's that you shouldn't be paying any more than 30% of your gross income toward your housing costs. As time goes on, we've thought about a few little nuances in that. So for example, a single parent with 3 children paying 30% of their gross income on housing costs is going to face more challenges than someone, a single person who only has to worry about feeding and clothing themselves. Another element is, sorry, just lost my train of thought. I had with the the little pop-up in the chat there.
Oh, that was my fault.
Anyways,
sorry.
There's something else, but I don't remember what it was. So the 30% rule of thumb is really, I remember what it was. It was energy poverty, of course. That as utility costs escalate, it is there's also a concept of energy poverty. How much should you be paying towards the energy costs related to your housing? So if your housing is unaffordable and then your energy costs are unaffordable, you're in a worse state there. The challenge is that as time's gone by and as government budgets and funding toward housing have changed and shrunk, what governments have tried to do is to change the definition of affordability to one that's easier for them to fund. And what they've come up with is looking at housing that is affordable to someone that it's, sorry, we're scrolling through the document. Basically, we're looking at, they look at an average market rent in an area, And then they set that affordability as a percentage of that. So some of the new housing programs, they look at about 80% of average market rent. And the challenge with that definition really is that we're looking at what can the market bear. So if we know that vacancy rates are low and there's more pressure on rents, that there aren't caps on rents, then the rents are just going to go up and up, as we know they do. So 80% of average market rent goes up and up. And that 80% of average market rent bears no relationship to income and any change in income of people with low and moderate income. So the definition of affordability is important in government policy, and really can make all the difference as to who can afford to live there.
For sure, and so help us understand who is the who. Who are we talking about? What communities? What demographics?
Yeah. I think it's. I'm not going to have any major groundbreaking surprises here. The priority populations who are overrepresented in core housing need include Black-led households, refugee and immigrant households, Indigenous households, women-led households, single-parent-led households. In terms of youth, households with heads under 25, it's about 23% of people represented in core housing need who identify as households with the head under 25 years old, and then seniors as well. So so it's the people who are systemically excluded from society in general, right, and who are missing out on those opportunities.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really helpful. Okay, so the Starts with Home campaign was designed, not just to engage political stakeholders, but our community in general, on behalf of these sort of vulnerable populations that you're talking about, to try and address collectively some of these really pressing affordability issues. So walk us through the rationale that I may have not touched on already, some of the tactics, and how it was rolled out over the past while.
Yeah, sure. So the Alliance is an alliance. We've got over 70 members in our organization, but we know that as a sector, there are so many people engaged in this work. So when we set out to develop the Starts with Home campaign, we created a broad-based coalition of housing experts, sector agencies, sector associations, people with a depth of knowledge, and researchers and academics with a depth of knowledge of housing and homelessness issues, and of the policies that are at play at the different levels of government. Now, the Alliance focuses at the municipal level, and so we really wanted to focus on a campaign that was positive and hopeful, and that gave very straightforward recommendations on what we see as the key possibilities for solutions to the problems before us. So we worked together with this large coalition and came up with these 3 key messages and 6 key actions to stop the loss, create more, and preserve the quality of the housing that we have. So I don't know, do you want me to get into the nuts and bolts
maybe
of them,
those sort of 6 tactics, but I just see part of the value, I think, in an initiative like this is, there's parts of this discussion of this issue that are just very, very clear and very pressing. There's people in our community that are unsheltered and at great risk, and there's reasons for that, and there's urgency behind making sure that changes, that people have safe and secure and sustainable housing. Above that, stuff can get pretty wonky at times. Like this, these are policy discussions. These are sort of weird, hard to understand relationships between governments, and there's a lot sort of going on there. And I think Starts with Home has done a good job of trying to make that digestible and understandable, especially where the community comes in. Can you expand a little bit more on sort of how that happens, and how some of the more specific tactics you're taking are having results, or so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all kind of in the same boat at this phase of the pandemic, where You know, like really for the last couple of years, so much has had to happen virtually and on social media. I think our feeling is that, you know, these are great tools, but really where change is going to happen is when people have conversations, learn from each other, share their experience, and then talk to government and political officials, and start to push for change. So yes, a lot of our work has been centered, you know, in the virtual space. We've done events. We have a very robust Starts with Home website. We've developed really easy to access videos, graphic videos that really do a straightforward way of explaining the Starts with Home platform planks. And then we had a really strong social media campaign. And then in addition to the public campaign, we had a separate campaign directed specifically at municipal candidates, where we asked them to complete a survey signaling their endorsement of each of the platform planks in the Starts with Home campaign. And then we were able to share that information back to the public. You could go on our website, find out whether the candidates in your ward had endorsed Starts with Home, and then speak to them, if you chose, about your feelings on the matter, and hopefully inform their platform and make sure that candidates who endorse Starts with Home were supported at the ballot box. We also held a mayoral debate online with the leading mayoral candidates, and completely focused on the Starts with Home messaging, and it was a really lovely debate with some really good conversation.
So what kind of response did you get especially during the campaign period, in terms of candidates understanding the issues, you know, in a reasonable way, from members of the community who saw, you know, for whom this may or may not have resonated with, and how they sort of took on some of the suggestions and around approaches you were making? And the mayoral debate, did you get a feeling like this issue was starting to be understood in a more robust way?
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I didn't mention, of course, is those individual conversations. So as staff and supported by volunteers, we were reaching out to all of the candidates and their teams, but also to community organizations. So we had a lot of conversations with community associations and BIAs, and representatives from connected sectors like health and education, and culture. You know, basically, there's so many connections to housing and homelessness, and the discussions that we had were really interesting, because people definitely knew that housing was on the radar, and that the need to do something about the situation that we're in is pressing, right? The city did declare a housing and homelessness emergency in 2020. It hasn't gone away. It's something that was very important in all of these conversations. I would say that we heard, I think that for people in the downtown areas or inside the Greenbelt, they have a lot closer connection to the issue because of their downtown experience, the pressure on rents and that type of thing, plus the experience of seeing people in distress on the streets. And people in the suburban, outside the Greenbelt area, strangely don't see themselves as connected to this issue, which is interesting to me, because I know that there is such a lack of rental housing in general, affordable housing in specific, and access to programs and services. So for anyone out in the suburban and rural environments, if they suddenly find themselves needing an affordable home, whether it's for income reasons or fleeing violence, or job loss, or like whatever is taking them away from their home, there's nothing in their community and they are forced to leave. So it does really impact the communities out there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that added insight. That's really helpful. And encouraging. Like this work really does make a difference in terms of bringing this issue closer to people's minds, especially when sort of more broadly affordability is a challenge for everyone, obviously more severe for more vulnerable members of our community, but this is on everyone's mind. And I think in these moments, we're all a little closer to precarity, so it becomes more real, I think. So I mentioned off the top, like right away, we're in a sort of different environment post-election. Bill 23 is, I believe, called the Building More Homes Faster Act. It's devoted to housing. It's devoted to literally as quickly as possible creating more housing, creating space for that to happen. I don't want to get too deep into all the nitty gritty. It's also a gigantic bill, and has caused a lot of concern for sure across the province, especially in the sort of housing and homelessness sector. Just because while everyone agrees with the importance of having more housing come online as quickly as possible, the approaches behind this bill seem to likely to create concern and chaos in other ways. Starts with Home has sort of 6 clear actions identified, including things like strengthening tenant protections, developing an inclusionary zoning policy, increasing the municipal budget, licensing landlords, a couple of others. All of these in some ways were touched by Bill 23. And so can you walk us through, maybe this may be 2 questions at once, but the concerns that are consistently expressed in the housing and homelessness sector around this bill, why? And for Starts with Home, what does this mean for some of these actions and tactics and priorities that you've identified that you, I think, intend to continue to pursue with this new council as well?
I think, you're right. It's a huge bill. There's a lot in it. There's some stuff where you can look at it and say, oh, I know what this will do. But there's a lot of stuff in the bill that isn't clear, where we don't know what the impact will be on municipalities and on municipal budgets. And so that's a challenge. So I think that, the big things in the bill that are of most concern are the impact on tenant protections. We were in the process of working with the City of Ottawa, or rather the City of Ottawa was in the process of responding to concerns expressed in the previous council about lack of tenant protections and concerns around rent evictions and dem evictions. And there were conversations and there were requests for reports to be brought back in the new year. Well, this bill really has just taken away the municipal authority to provide those tenant protections. It grants the minister the authority to remove the tenant protections in place that would require municipalities or require developers to replace lost units at affordable rates. So boom, done. That's over the past 4 years in Ontario, I think we've protected 7,000 affordable homes that way. So that's a huge impact. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just, yes, the bill does, well, obviously the goal is to build more homes, but there are no targets in this bill around affordability. So there's if you're not measuring it, then maybe it's not important to you. I don't know. So the challenge is, yes, we may end up building a lot more homes. How will those homes be built? Are they going to need us to tear down existing buildings with affordable units and then build back with larger buildings, more units, but at a higher price point? If we've destroyed the tenant protections, where do the existing tenants go? How do people who are already not having access to housing in the market, how are they going to afford anything? Is this going to improve their opportunities? And really, it doesn't seem that those questions were really considered in the development of the bill. So it'll be a matter of, and then I guess the last thing to say would be that with regard to development charges, I think the city is still trying to calculate the impact that the loss of development charges will have on the available funding for new affordable housing. And I don't think that that was the intention of the province to disincentivize the creation of affordable housing, but I don't think they had the time to really explain or to really get it all going on.
And you have to think there's not an intent to not pay attention to real affordable housing and real critical affordable housing. The conversations I've had with folks have I think the impression is, maybe from a government perspective, if you were able to just build a bunch of stuff really fast, the affordable pieces will trickle down. The market will take care of that, and it'll be part of what happens if we can tackle sort of the numbers issue and get stuff online.
Yeah,
has that
I
ever
challenge
happened?
that? I'm going to go back to my little history lesson again. Just that in the 1970s, the federal government brought in the Condo Corporations Act that created the opportunity for people to develop buildings and then sell them off as individual condominiums. Prior to that time, that didn't exist. So if you were going to build a large building, it was going to be a rental building, or you were going to build it and own the whole thing. At that point, really, that's when rental construction in the private market stopped happening in Canada, across Canada. So that was the 1970s. So most of our existing rental stock is 50 years old or older. And, I've heard over and over again, yes, the market will take care of it, but truthfully, the market will take care of it if it makes money for someone, and affordable housing doesn't make money for anyone. It needs government support. It needs nonprofit management, and it needs intentionality.
Yeah, and so that ends up taking the form of regulations or requirements, and I think that's where the spirit of things like this bill are like, we need to remove, sorry to use this term, but the red tape needs to be torn down, and then things will start to have success. That could be a fair argument, but I think it's really important for us to understand when we're talking about regulations around affordable housing, we're talking about things like when you build a tower, let's say, hopefully 10%, hopefully more, but probably less of those units need to be held at a certain price to be accessible to people that need it the most, right? Yes. That's what we're talking about, and that needs to be enforced, right?
Yeah, and just reminding me that your question a while back was how has it caused our Starts with Home campaign to pivot. So one of the items in Bill 23 was capping the inclusionary zoning at 5% in a new development. Our platform was asking for 20%, including units that would be affordable to very low income, and including large unit sizes available for families. So that is going to impact our advocacy going forward. I think we're sort of, scrapping the whole idea of inclusionary zoning, and trying to look at other ways to ensure that there is affordable development included in new development across our city.
Yeah, and so the new council in Ottawa is very new, and I don't think we don't really know what sort of tone they're going to take, how they'll work together, how they'll work with community. Although I think there's encouraging signs based on the various campaigns that affordable housing is going to be a top line issue. I think it was going in to this election. I think it seems to be a priority for many of the councillors, for the mayor. So that's encouraging. At the same time, this bill goes through as presented. It sort of handcuffs. Part of the concern about it is sort of handcuffs municipalities in terms of how forceful they can be for things like, for example, setting targets for affordable unit rates, numbers of rates or percentages of rates in a new build, for example, among other things. So what do we do then in that situation? How do we get creative and work as a community together with council, with stakeholders, with donors, which I think I want to point out that no one in the sector that I know thinks anything can happen around affordable housing without the development industry being part of it. How do we engage in a maybe a new way or in a more creative way to adjust to this new atmosphere?
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, by asking members of the candidates for council whether they endorsed the platform, we were able to do a tally after the election and find that we had really strong support from the incoming council for many of our platform planks. So we're really encouraged, and we'll be booking meetings with councillors in the new year to start developing that relationship with them. I think that's a really important thing, is to recognize that that members of council want solutions. They're there because they want a good city. They want positive, hopeful change. And so, we're happy to work with them on that. I guess the second thing is, so first of all, the first thing of the second thing, never let governments off the hook. Governments fund what the priorities that rise to the top for them, right? And we know that with the federal government, housing is expensive, right? And so the work that we do with the municipal government, it's really about, can we help? Can we reduce fees? What are the policy enablers? Is there city land that's available? What are the tools in the municipal toolbox? But at the end of the day, if we're talking about building affordable housing, that takes a federal government commitment. And we have seen that investment come in through the National Housing Strategy and Reaching Home, Canada's federal homelessness strategy. I think the Auditor General's report recently was very, very critical about whether we're actually using the funding to actually affect change. And if we are we able to measure that change? We're not sure yet. So there's work to be done there, but let's not let government off the hook. That if this is important, and it is, let's spend the money, let's do it wisely. So that's important. But having said that, this is not just a government problem. We all have a role to play in affecting change and creating the city that we want to see. So there's a role for politicians to show that true leadership and make some of those hard decisions about funding and to choose to support things that they know are expensive. I remember talking to Mayor Watson, former Mayor Watson, many, many years ago, and him saying, when I go and do a ribbon cutting at an arts institution or at a baseball diamond, I get all sorts of accolades. But when I do a ribbon cutting at an affordable housing development, I've got protesters there, or people send me nasty emails. So I think we really do need to promote the fact that we want to see investment in affordable housing. We want to see these solutions. And then we need good, strong bureaucrats who are able to look at best practices from across the country and the province particularly, and bring forward those recommendations. But as community members, it's really helpful if we're engaged, and that can mean reading the news, or it can mean, following organizations like the Alliance to End Homelessness and other advocacy groups on social media, getting involved in events, going out to rallies like the ones that have happened recently around Bill 23, writing to politicians, getting involved. And truthfully, just having those conversations. It's such a weird world we live in right now, and there's so much divisiveness, and I don't know how we get through that. But I know when we're talking about housing, if we can go back, maybe we don't agree on this, but if we can go back to about whether we should spend money, or how we should spend money, or what the housing should look like. But if we go back to what we can agree on, we're going to get back to a place that says, I want a secure home for myself. I want my children to have a secure home. I'd like my community to have security in their tenure. You want good things for people. You don't want to see people in distress. Okay, well, let's go back forward. Okay, well, how? And I think we can build those solutions together.
That's wonderfully said, Meg. Thanks for that. I think, yes, of course. And I think within that, you highlighted some ways that people who maybe aren't necessarily in a precarious position themselves can reinforce and support some of this work. And and practically, we've seen over the past few years with this with our current provincial government that there is, when people get loud enough, there is a response generally. And right now, I think around the challenges of this current housing bill, it's been kind of the same voices that have been like, very clearly and constructively, I think, expressing concerns and illustrating sort of what's missing. But maybe what would help is having people add their voices to those sort of sector leaders, and reinforce that this is good for community as well, to make sure we're paying attention to some of these key issues. We're going to open it up to the audience in a minute or so, but I did want to talk about, we've a lot of this has been very much about the infrastructure of the housing and homelessness issue, about making sure there are literal homes that are accessible and secure and safe and sustainable places people can make their lives and be secure. But there's so much wrapped around that's important to the members of the Alliance, that's important to United Way, that's important to GenNext, and as a part of the work we all do. Can we just remind ourselves of like, affordable housing? The actual housing is hugely challenging and complex to have online and to be accessible, and so important as a first step in recovering from being homeless and experiencing that trauma. But what else are we contributing to as supporters to the Alliance? And when we advocate on behalf of some of this stuff, what are the other pieces that are so important to keep in mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. Everything starts with home. If you don't have a secure home, then your chances of success in life are diminished. You don't have access to the fullness of our society. So whether we're talking about education or employment or health or mental health or supports for people who need support for independent living, or supports living through complex mental health issues and addictions, it's really hard to move forward if you don't have that very basic building block of affordable, safe, secure housing. I do, often when we talk about this, we want to focus in on, is it youth? Is it people with substance use? Is it people with mental health issues? And at the end of the day, really what we're talking about, unfortunately, it does also, the common denominator is poverty. Sorry, I can go back to policy all the time. Basically the policy, the income policy that we have keeps people poor. It doesn't give them enough to live on, keeps people in crisis, keeps people in trauma. And so, you can manage a lot of challenges in your life if you have that financial security, and if you have that secure home.
Yeah, no, thanks for framing it the way you did. I want to maybe just pick up on one thread of that, and you mentioned it earlier on, that having accessible and affordable housing as a place to go is especially important for people in certain circumstances, including those fleeing violence.
Yeah.
We're at the tail end of the 16 days of activism around gender-based violence, and we We just had December 6th, the National Day of Remembrance. This piece of the housing challenge has always haunted me a little bit, because we know that I think in Eastern Ontario every year about 4,000 women and children try to escape violent situations but have no place to go, because there is no place to go. Are you able to just speak a little bit more about how? So to me, this is it really is a life and death issue in many circumstances, and I think sometimes we lose track of that in some of the policy discussions. Anything to add to that piece of this discussion?
Yeah, for sure. Just that you're right. It's a life and death decision, and I almost hate using the word choice when we're talking about the paths people end up taking, because really they have no choice. There are no options available to them. And yes, it is, it's dangerous, it's precarious, it's traumatizing, and it takes so much energy, right? That stress, and that uncertainty, the impact on your ability to manage while you're dealing with this alarm bell going off in the back of the trauma that you're experiencing, and then having to navigate through systems that aren't prepared to respond quickly. I used to use the hospital example, but our hospitals are having such a hard time right now that it doesn't even work anymore. But it used to be that if you needed urgent medical care, either you would get yourself to a hospital, or you would get an ambulance and get to a hospital, and you would be triaged and you would be treated in the appropriate manner, referred to the proper specialist and given the life-saving urgent treatment that you need. And then you would move to a recovery and then move back to your own stable home setting. If you think about somebody in an urgent crisis of housing, first of all, we don't, other than we do have the shelter system, but the challenge is there's a bottleneck there, right? We don't, there's, you can get programs and services at the shelter, but there's no recovery space. There's no back to the permanent housing, because it's just not, we just don't have enough.
Yeah. Well, you've done a great job of illustrating, Meg, why this initiative is called Starts with Home, because quite literally that is where we start the process of recovering from some of the traumas you just identified, and some of the experiences that bring people to precarious situations and homelessness. So thank you for this. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. I know we have some moderators looking out, but I'll just, if you have a question, please raise your hand or jump in. Now's your chance.
And I just want to, I feel like that was a little doom and gloom, and unfortunately sometimes it is, but just that this isn't rocket science. It isn't unsolvable. It's very solvable, and even within our community, it's not like we have to take a huge leap. We can make systems level changes that really improve the outcomes. We're seeing that across the country, in different provinces, in different communities in Ontario, where people are making changes and they are reducing chronic homelessness, reducing veterans homelessness. It's the work is happening now.
Yeah, but I think Ottawa can be a leader too, or at least more so than we have been. Sorry, I did miss a question from Jake in the chat. How does the housing process work in Ottawa now, with some sub questions? How many people are waiting for housing? How many homes are available? Is there mental health support after they get a home? And does Bill 23 change the Ottawa housing process in the future? I think you touched a bit on that last one. So there's a few things there. Do you want to try and summarize?
Yeah, sure. So anyone who is looking for subsidized affordable housing needs to put their name on the waiting list at the Ottawa Social Housing Registry. And there are about, let's say, 12 to 15,000 households on that list. and the wait list can be years. And basically when a vacancy opens up in an affordable housing provider with a subsidized space available, they would go and choose the first name off that list that qualifies for that unit. So it tries to be an equitable system in that way. There's also a special priority for people who are experiencing homelessness or fleeing violence. And then additionally, that's sort of the housing end of things. On the homelessness side, there is special funding through Reaching Home, so that so people experiencing chronic homelessness are able to access a different stream of funding, and generally that's more to put them into the supportive housing environment where they do have those wraparound supports that follow them into their housing. And that is also a prioritized system, but a separate list.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think
that's great. One more question from Marwan. What are some things now that we can help to action as a community? So I think you touched on some pieces of this, but a great place to sort of send us off after the lunch hour. What to keep in mind and how to stay engaged and contribute to this on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so like I was saying, like stay informed, please sign up to our newsletter through the Starts With Home platform website. We're going to be launching into some new programs. This isn't just a project that ends with the election of the new members of council, and there'll be ongoing opportunities for public engagement. We'll be asking you to write letters, to get involved, to come out to events, to attend film screenings, to participate as volunteers. There's lots of opportunities there.
Awesome. I think people forget too, like, politicians can seem inaccessible, or like, what's the point of writing an email or making a call? It really does have an impact. So those old tried and true methods work also.
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
We've got just a couple of more minutes. I know we wanted to hear from our GenNext advocate, Giancarlo Sarkozy. Giancarlo, over to you.
Hi, folks. I'd like to thank you, Cameron, for hosting, and GenNext East Ontario. And I'm super appreciative of you, Meg, and the work you're doing, your advocacy work, and just how you've untangled such a complicated, emotional, sensitive topic, like the affordability crisis, the housing crisis, the social determinants of health. It's huge. And, unpacking what municipal, federal, provincial levers need to be pulled individually together to really address this. So thank you. And as a community member, I am now better equipped to also advocate and then to support the cause. So thanks for that. As Cameron said, my name is Giancarlo. I'm a volunteer with GenNext in the Advocate program. Thank you for everyone who's come today. I'm very happy to say that the proceeds of the event tickets will be going directly back into our communities in support of programs that support youth homelessness or combat youth homelessness. GenNext is a very good program. I'm happy to be a member of it and have been a member for a few years now. We also focus on mental health, equitable employment, and diversity and inclusion efforts. We'll drop a link in the chat for our website if you want to know more. As I said, I joined GenNext because and have been involved for several years because I'm passionate about my community and I'm passionate about supporting these causes and making change within my local community. It's important to understand, the local context and the local dynamic and what is working, what isn't working, and how we can all fit together to make change. And small change can go pretty far. Small impact, small efforts can have a big repercussion down the line through the reverberations that, you know, we're all making. So if you're able to make a donation to GenNext, please do so, and know that your support is so very much appreciated. There are giving opportunities. You can be a monthly donor to help youth have a safer and more stable future. And there's quite a few other initiatives, as I've said, regarding diversity and inclusion and equitable employment. If you have the time or interest, you can also become part of the Advocate program. We're a small but mighty group of volunteers that dedicate roughly 2 to 4 hours every month, helping to raise awareness for GenNext and the causes that we care about. So you could be, you know, a very small speaker like me at one of these events, or volunteering in another capacity, spreading the good word, as I like to call it, with, you know, your own networks, your own colleagues, your own family. I think information sharing is a big part of this community. The more we know, the better we can do, and the more conscious we can be, or we become of what's going on in Ottawa and surrounding areas. So small commitment, big impact. And yeah, I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much, folks, for attending. And again, a big thank you to Meg and GenNext. I hope you have a wonderful day and all the best over the upcoming holiday seasons. So take care.
Awesome. Thanks, Giancarlo. You took us right to 1 p.m. So well done.
Bye, folks.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. And thanks to Meg.